So we are here with Charlie Webster, TV and radio writer and journalist, campaigner against domestic and sexual abuse. She is an advisor to the Ministry of Justice, celebrity fundraiser of the year, a special ambassador for Malaria No More. Charlie has achieved various world firsts in her career, including becoming the first female globally to anchor boxing and a heavyweight world title fight. She's also an Ironman triathlete and marathon runner. Welcome, Charlie.
What are you talking about? I get quite embarrassed when people read some of the stuff I've done. I don't know why, but thank you for having me on anyway. And hi everybody.
Very impressive, Charlie. We really admire all that you've done. Charlie, please could you sort of start us off by telling us about your childhood, where you grew up and what that was like?
Yeah, I grew up in Sheffield. I suppose I look back at my childhood and it was tough. The quickest phrase to use, I suppose, is I was brought up to survive. I was brought up in an abusive home. And she, by multiple different marriages of my mom, and it was my stepdad basically, just there was a lot of abuse and control and violent behaviors and very repressed environment. It didn't teach me about healthy relationships. In fact, it normalized violence for me, and it normalized controlling behaviors. And that's just what I thought life was. And it also normalized unhappiness, I think, and the lack of opportunity and potential. So when I went to school, I just felt like I was nothing, because I think that's what I was taught at home.
But then you went on to be a very successful athlete. Just say about that.
Oh, well, yeah. I do marathons and triathlons now. But when I was a teenager, I trained as part of a elite girls running club in Sheffield. And it was amazing because it gave me an outlet for my anger. You know, I was anger. I was angry. I didn't understand my life. I think as I got to be a teenager, I suffered depression and self-harm, and just had a bad relationship with myself, because the message I was given in my home was that I wasn't good enough and that I didn't deserve love. Unfortunately, I was then groomed in that running club by my running coach, and sexually abused as part of that as a teenager. And I think, again, you tend to find children that are brought up in abusive and very difficult homes, that there tends to be multiple traumas, and it's because they're extremely vulnerable to people like my coach, who was a predator and did end up going to prison. He made me believe that it was all to help me be a better athlete and win. And because he knew that winning was attached to my self-worth, which was then attached to how I felt that if I had that worth and if I had that achievement, then I would change my home environment. So it was all kind of interconnected, really.
And it's amazing, though, that you've done something about it. And that's what's so impressive, Charlie. You've decided that there's something that you can do, and you've decided to speak up about all these things that happened to you, but to other people as well.
Yeah, it took time, though, because, you know, I did, for a long time, I was in my own head, and it became very confusing. And I've had to do a lot of thinking about it as an adult, and I've had to do a lot of healing. The more I spoke about it, and the more I realized that so many people have gone through this as well, and it can be very isolating. And it's quite often the aftermath and the long-term trauma of being isolated in what's happened to you, and the shame and the guilt and all these feelings that are wrong feelings, but they're feelings that the perpetrator, the abuser, put into you, so you take them on. And I think it's the isolation of them that actually causes the real long-term damage. So the more that it's spoken about, and the more that it's okay, it's acceptable to speak about, we should be having everyday conversations about it. There shouldn't be a shame or we shouldn't talk about that. You know, it should be spoken about so we can enable people to heal and then prevent it.
And Charlie, you're a fighter, aren't you? I mean, you're a boxer. a boxer. And then you had to fight to be the first female like boxing commentator on Box TV, and now you're fighting for human rights and against the oppression of abuse.
I definitely, in my early days of my career, it really served me well in achievement and career sense, because I entered my career when there was like literally no women or hardly any women anyway. And I had this like armor around me where I was like, you know, no matter what you say to me, I'm going to prove you wrong. And then I do remember walking in the door of the office of the television studios, I won't mention the name, and they told me that females, the audience wasn't ready for a female to talk about boxing. And I was like, really? And I walked out of the room and I was like, right. And it was like, it was an anger, you know, but it was an anger driven to no, like I felt no. And I felt that not just for myself, but for every young girl out there like me. And I think I feel such deep empathy with that, because I'm like, you know, no, like young girls can do anything and they should aspire to, if they want to talk about boxing. It's absolutely ridiculous to think that, you know, in this day and age that a woman can't talk about those things. So anyway, then I became the first woman in the world to host a heavyweight world boxing title fight and host boxing, because I made sure of it.
And then Charlie, you turned up at Alpha, at HTB. I remember you arriving here. It was such a pleasure to meet you. What brought you along?
When I first walked into HTB, into church, so randomly in the year of 2016, and I'd never been to a church service in my entire life. So we're talking 4 years ago. And, you know, part of my background is it was very atheist. You know, Christianity was seen as a, oh, well, they're not like us, they think they're better than us, you know, and they're judging us. And it was kind of taught to me like that. I think I had a really negative perception of what Christianity was. However, I always felt like I had God inside me, and I have no idea where this comes from, because it definitely, well, it must come from God, because it definitely didn't come from the influence around me. That there was, I always felt that, I don't know, if I put my mind to it, I could do good things. And I really wanted that. I think because I saw a lot of destruction around me and chaos, I wanted to change that for my life. And I wanted to show that I was a good person and I could do good things. And so I just was always drawn to God and religion. So then I just walked into your church and your church, that listening, and I honestly stood there and I must have looked like the most coldest person ever, which I'm not, and you both know me, because I stood there with my arms folded and I was like, so suspicious about everybody. It's like, why is everybody so happy? Why are they singing? Like, and I felt like angry and I felt hurt. And I think that was the part that started to understand that maybe that was my healing that I needed to do. I think inside I had such turmoil, and like my thing was always that, you know, you had to be tough. And because I was brought up in unsafety, nothing ever felt safe. So then I just was like that as an adult, I think. So it was very hard for me to be open, and it was really interesting. Like, I think Alpha gave me that safe space to try and start to open myself up to see if I was safe enough to be able to allow a bit of love in and also give a bit of love. It helped me face a lot of things, if I'm honest. And Alpha was part of a journey for me to heal the trauma that I'd gone through, which is so incredibly important, and it hurts so much to face it, but it's only in facing it that you can heal. After Alpha, I went and cycled 3,000 miles from London to Rio, and I made it, and it was for charity. And then the next day I actually fell into a coma. I was on a life support machine and was given 24 hours to live. And I really believe that God saved me. And I really believe that I met you both for a reason. And I went on Alpha that year and stepped into a church for the first time that year to help me fight what I went through, because doctors, when I did survive, and I was in hospital in Brazil, and I was very, very, very ill, where they didn't think I was going to survive. I had multiple organ failure, and they thought I got brain damage. And actually, like, I'm sat in front of you today, and they said it was a miracle. And I really believe that I was meant to get through it.
We've been living in this sort of COVID time, and life has been so weird. And with all the things that you stand up for, what do you think is going on, particularly with the sort of domestic violence issue?
Yeah, it's a really good question, because we've seen that the rates of people seeking help, both men and women, have increased. It's important that we don't say because of lockdown domestic abuse has increased. That's not the case. It's the fact that more people are reaching out for help. So if we really understand what domestic abuse is, which is the most important thing for us to start preventing it, is that it's a pattern of behaviors to control. I think 99.9% of the people I've met that experienced domestic abuse didn't understand they were in domestic abuse in that moment in time, because we downplay our experiences. That's what we do in human nature. And we have to remember that domestic abuse is within a family. So it's very confusing, because there's an element of love there. There's love with that person, but there is help out there. It's really important to say that there is. And there's also a lot of healing. You know, my family have done a lot of healing. My mum's out of her domestic abuse relationship, but it really takes time. And it's never the victim's fault. I know we've talked about some tough subjects in this conversation, but I think it's really important to say that through trauma, there is another side.
Charlie, you're amazing. Now, you do a podcast too, so if people want to hear more about what you're saying, it's undiscussable, and that's fantastic. And you're so brave and courageous. I'm just so grateful to know you. I think you're...
Thank you so much. Charlie Webster.
Thank you so much.